The namesake and reckoning are a fantastic pairing of text to be studying for the reading and comparing unit. And today we're going to go through a sample paragraph that I've put together for you. And so I want you to take a look at not just the ideas and some of the comparisons that are drawn here, but also at the language that allows this to be really comparative. We've got another YouTube video on this pairing that's a bit of a general overview, and it might also provide you with some really great ideas. You can check that out by clicking on the link that just came up. While you're there, you can also check out the rest of the videos on our channel. But for now, we'll get stuck into the paragraph. And as you can see, it begins. The lives of the protagonists of each text are heavily influenced by the experience of their parents, as both parent and child undergo a process of establishing themselves. One as a person becoming an adult, and the other as an immigrant to a new country with the desire to redefine their lives. And so you'll notice there the language that allows this to be broad and general in what it's saying overall about the two texts. It hasn't dived into any evidence or examples yet. It hasn't dived into any specific example, but rather it's talking about them as a pairing. Rather than talking about, okay, there's text A and then there's text B, the language that allows that to happen is things such as this, where it says, the protagonists of each text. And so that way we've got that very general way of being able to talk about these two texts without it necessarily being, text A, text B. You can see that it's a really clear idea to start off and talking about the similarities that exist there. Let's see how it goes as it moves on. Peter Zabansky seldom speaks of his past in any form of detail and is instead portrayed as a man who is desperate to separate himself from his previous life. As Zabansky describes her father as a man who had given up on isms and whose only link to his European culture was through an embarrassing pair of shorts, she illustrates the lengths that Peter must go to in order to get past his personal history. Whilst never outlining a love for Australia, Peter is depicted as strongly wedded to its culture through his involvement at the tennis club and his work in the backyard. Australia offers him a place of respite and an opportunity for him to begin a life with his family through which he tries to forget who he once was and what he had to do during the war. And so you'll notice there, some of you might be thinking that, oh, geez, that's a lot on reckoning. We haven't got to any comparison yet. And, we're really dealing with 3-4 sentences in a row there that is all just, putting on this, evidence for one of the texts in reckoning. And I've just made it red there so you can see that idea that, all of those sentences are only talking about reckoning. Now, your school might have taught you, a blocking or a woven technique or anything like that. It's one of the things we get a lot of questions about. There's no one right or wrong way to write these paragraphs. You need to practice all these different ways so that you get comfortable with what you're going to be able to do in that 1 hour that you have for the exam at the end of the year. But one thing that's worth pointing out here is that even though I've written this and I'm showing this to you as an example, I'd be thinking that if I added anything more to that, I'd be overdoing it. It probably has been overdone a touch in that there's a lot of evidence there. There's a lot of things that have been said. I probably could have made that point a little bit clearer or perhaps I should say a little more succinctly than what I have. But the evidence is there. It's a really clear understanding of who Peter Zabansky is and this way in which he has to identify himself as an Australian and re-establish himself with a new identity, reinvent himself as a person. Take a look at what happens after this though, because if you've been guilty of overloading your paragraphs with evidence and not getting to comparison, there might be some things here that can really help you out. Whilst Ashok and Ashima similarly find themselves in a new country following hardship and trauma, their connection to their home differs greatly from Magda's parents. And so you'll see that this paragraph really starts to get going here because instead of it being, okay, here's all this evidence about reckoning and then here's a whole chunk of evidence about the namesake, what we have is that the evidence that's coming through in the discussion of the namesake is informed by what was said before it. everything that has been said about reckoning is informing what we are going to say then about the namesake. So therefore, it's not this, I'm talking about one text, then I'm talking about the other. It's this idea about talking about them, together and at the same time. And so you'll notice here that we get straight into it. Whilst Ashoka and Ashima, we don't need to spend any time reintroducing the text, saying, Jhumpa Lahiri is the namesake, the characters, the parents of Gogol are called, We know all those things. We've said that in the introduction, so we can dive straight into it. Don't be afraid to dive straight into the other text. Some students feel a bit, anxious about, I've been talking about one, do I have to reintroduce the other? No, it's known that you're talking about these two. But notice here it uses this word, similarly. Now, some of you might be looking at that and going, great, this is where it starts to compare. And it does, because it's saying that Ashoka and Ashima similarly find themselves in a new country. So it's referring back to everything that has been said about Peter and him establishing himself in Australia. Following hardship and trauma, their connection to their home differs greatly from Magda's parents. So you can see here that whilst this is a sentence, and say we, coloured it blue because, it was about the namesake, what we start to get here is that at the end of the sentence, we actually start referring to Magda's parents. So therefore, there's a little bit of, reckoning at the end of it. So what it essentially means is that this paragraph is starting to become blended and that it's going to start comparing here. And already it has. Their connection to their home differs. We've actually started to get to some differences that exist between the texts. Therefore, we're getting to some deeper comparison. Let's see how it goes from here. Rather than seeing America as a new opportunity to build a new identity, Ashima feels that Gogol's birth, without a single grandparent or parent or uncle or aunt at her side, is somehow haphazard, only half true. And so, we'd colour this blue in saying that, that's all about the namesake, okay? But let's really focus on this first part here, though, because even though it is referring to a character from the namesake, let's really have a think about how it might be referring to Peter Zabansky as well. Rather than seeing America as a new opportunity to build a new identity, that's referring to Peter Zabansky using Australia as a chance to form a new identity. So even though, again, I'll make the same point, even though it's talking about the namesake, it's being informed by what's already being said about reckoning. So therefore, it's working at that deeper level. The strength of her connection to her home and her heritage is exhibited through her inability to completely assimilate to American culture, with Lahiri constantly referring to a hybrid of American and Bengali culture, such as the Christmas parties or the Rice Krispies with peanuts and red onion. The Ganggulis reach out for familiarity in order to help them feel more comfortable in America, hosting gatherings with a family not through fondness, but because of a past they happen to share. So, we could pretty confidently say that that those two sentences really are just helping us put in some evidence that shows our understanding of the namesake and how Ashoka and Ashima's experience differs from that of Peter Zabansky. That point's been made. We've done a good job of making some comparisons, but it's probably a little bit light on for it now. We really need to seal off this paragraph with a really strong sense of comparison of what we're trying to get to and a really clear analytical comparison. Let's see how it goes. And it begins with a great word in thus. Thus can be one of those fantastic ways of you being able to say, all right, I've put all this evidence in front of you. I've put some comparisons. I've put varying ideas about the two texts. I've put down some evidence that says, these is how the characters do it from one text. This is how the characters do it from the other. We're getting towards the end of the paragraph, and I really want to make sure that I'm getting to a really clear comparison. So I start with thus, taking all this in. Thus, here we go. Thus, the texts examine the manner in which immigrants to countries are forced to reinvent themselves, either reluctantly or wholeheartedly. Now, even though that might not look like a really sort of perfect form of comparison, essentially that is a comparison as to the differences between Magda's parents and Gogol's parents, in that even though they share this idea that people must reinvent themselves as immigrants to new countries, some of them will do it reluctantly and some of them will do it wholeheartedly. That's where the texts start to splinter off and differ. Despite the desire to change and re-establish themselves differing, Peter looking to forget his past and Ashima fighting to hold on to hers, both sets of parents are led to becoming new versions of themselves due to the need to assimilate in a culture that is foreign to them. And so that last sentence really sums it up nicely, doesn't it? And when we take a look at the use of the dashes there and this little aside that we have in the middle of this sentence, that really helps us achieve it. That might be a sentence structure that you might want to look at with your essay writing, in saying that, okay, I'm going to start by saying, look, the texts are the same. The texts are different, dash this one and this way and this one and this other way. This is where they come back to being similar. Essentially, guys, what you're looking to do in your paragraph writing for comparative, when you're looking to get to that deeper sense of comparison and really making sure that you're not just listing evidence, that you're actually comparing that, those concepts and those deeper ideas, is to always be moving backward and forward between this is what the two texts share, this is where they start to differ. Or vice versa, like I have there at the end. Even though this is where they differ, they come back to share this idea overall. And so you can see the different ways that that's been done there. As I said to you before, this is just one way to go about writing the paragraph. I'm not saying that this is the way that you should do it. There's perhaps some sentence starters, some sentence structures, some evidence from these two texts, or perhaps just even what has been compared here that could really help you out with it. Make sure to ask lots of questions down there in the comments. We'll always look to answer them as quickly as we can. That's how we like to really help out with things. Share this video with friends of yours that are studying this great pairing, and check out all of our other videos to help you get yourself absolutely firing in time for the exam. But until we see you next time in one of our videos, all the best for your studies and good luck.